We just got fresh details on iOS 18, including Apple's new AI system, supported devices, the fake screenshot that showed a redesign, and more. We're also going to discuss the latest on Apple and Google's new partnership, an update on iOS 17.5 Beta 1 and everything that was included in the updates, how the EU is now trying to ruin Apple, and more, all in today's episode. And if you want to stay out of the loop, then just stay unsubscribed. Otherwise, hit that subscribe button down below so you stay up to date and in the loop with everything going on in the world of Apple. Okay, so let's start with Apple's new AI system that might be implemented in iOS 18, and this is called ReALM, or Reference Resolution as Language Modeling. And this is a new AI system that could greatly improve Siri's ability to understand context in a conversation, process on-screen content, and also detect background activities. And this model uses a new approach of converting screen information to text at an on-device level. So we're talking about Siri here. And here's how the paper describes these tasks. So number one is on-screen entities. So these are entities that are currently displayed on a user's screen. Number two is conversational. So it says these are entities relevant to the conversation. So these entities might come from a previous turn for the user. And it shows an example of when the user says, call mom, the contact for mom would be the relevant entity in question. And then number three is the most interesting to me, and this is background entities. So these are relevant entities that come from background processes that might not necessarily be a direct part of what the user sees on their screen or their interaction with the virtual agent. For example, an alarm that starts ringing or music that is playing in the background. And basically an example use case of this in action would be if you're scrolling through a website and you want to call a business, a user would tell Siri to call the business, and Siri would be able to see the phone number on the website and call it directly. You wouldn't have to tap on the phone number to call anymore, if this model is implemented into iOS 18, for example. And according to Apple's research paper, this new model substantially outperformed OpenAI's GPT-4 model despite having fewer parameters. And this looks to be a major step forward for Siri. So Siri's biggest weakness, their biggest shortcoming ever since the introduction of Siri, was that it wasn't very contextually aware. It didn't really have much context. It couldn't take all that information in and give you a result based on previous context, or in this example, context on the screen. So if we see this added in iOS 18, it's going to be a huge upgrade to Siri. Now, we also saw a fresh update on iOS 18 supported devices earlier this week. So this news comes from 9to5Mac, and it looks like all devices that were supported on iOS 17 will also be supported with iOS 18. So that is for the iPhone. So every iPhone that can run iOS 17, if this is true, we'll be able to run iOS 18, but that's not the same for iPadOS, because for iPadOS 18, it looks like there's going to be 3 iPads that get dropped in terms of support. So the iPad 6, iPad Pro 10.5, and the second generation iPad Pro 12.9 will be dropped. So that means that even the iPad 7 from 2019 with that A10 chip will apparently be supported for another year. However, I would not expect all of these devices to support the new AI features that are coming with iOS 18. You're going to need a much stronger, neural system, a neural engine, and some of these older devices are just not going to be capable of running some of these on-device AI, features. So we'll have to wait and see how that shakes out. Now, earlier this week, there was a leaked screenshot of the first look of iOS 18 and the supposed redesign that's coming to the software, but that turned out to be fake. So this was the design, this was the screenshot in question, and this came from MacRumors. So, they do have rumors in their name, so it's not necessarily a surprise that they posted something that turned out to be fake, but they got this, screenshot here of the camera application, and it shows what could be or what could have been the redesign for iOS 18, and it shows that visionOS style, but apparently they heard from multiple sources that this was not real. Although I have to say this would be awesome to see, especially in the camera application. I think this design, especially down here at the bottom, looks really slick. Now, even though that screenshot was apparently fake, I would not completely rule out some UI elements, that are going to have a redesign similar to visionOS. We heard from the verifier earlier last month that iOS 18 and iPadOS 18 will feature visionOS inspired design elements. Now, that's not necessarily, a trusted source. It's not a great source, but it is somebody saying that we are going to see some UI enhancements, although Mark Gurman did come out and say to not expect any type of design overhaul with iOS 18. However, he did say that we are going to see some home screen customization, like potentially the ability to have blank widgets and blank app icons on the home screen so we can customize the look of our springboard. And according to the poll in the Apple Den newsletter last week, it looks like most of you guys want customization over stability with iOS 18. And I found that pretty interesting. So by the way, if you're not subscribed to the Apple Den newsletter, I do these polls every week. I will leave a link down in the description below. Okay, so now let's talk about the EU and how they're trying to ruin Apple. So first off, let me just preface this by saying that I have great respect for the EU, and they've done a lot of good in the past, but I think this latest report, this latest, step that they're trying to take is a bit overboard and absurd. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to require Apple to allow iPhone users to delete the Photos application. So this came from the EU's executive vice president, and they said that allowing users to remove the Photos app was something that Apple failed to do in its DMA response. And this is once again just another example of how the EU and how the government does not fully understand the technology at play here. So, like I mentioned in the Apple Den newsletter, the Photos app is not just an app like Safari or Music. It's the system level interface to the camera roll. And basically what the EU is saying here is that Apple is going to have to allow third-party apps to serve as the system level image library and camera roll. And that is crazy because the Photos app is an integral part of the Apple ecosystem across every Apple device. So supporting alternative, photo management apps would force Apple to restructure iOS and the entire ecosystem. And plus, the Photos application contains perhaps your most private and sensitive information of any application that you use on your device. And we've trusted Apple with that for so many years. They've been the best at securing that data. I don't know why anybody else would trust another company with their photos. And plus, it's not like Apple has ever prevented anybody from downloading a third-party photo management application anyways. Like you can use Google Photos, you can use whatever other management system out there. Apple has never restricted that. So I personally think this proposition is ridiculous from the EU. I see no chance that this ever passes because Apple is not going to allow that, especially, a system level application like Photos. But what do you think? Do you think this is a good proposition by the EU, or are you like me and you completely disagree and think this is absurd for the EU to even try to enforce this? All right, so for the three of you out there with the Apple Vision Pro, this week we did see a huge new update to the Apple Vision Pro in the form of Spatial Personas, and it came via a server-side update on Vision OS 1.1 and later. So now when you use Spatial Personas, which I use this, it's incredible. Basically, when you make a FaceTime call with another Vision OS user, the box that they once sat in, usually, they would sit in this little box and they would just kind of be in that box at all times. Now, with this new update, that box has been broken and the person on the FaceTime call with you is free, and it looks like they're in your room like a ghost, just like actually in the room with you. It's actually quite creepy how realistic it seems when you're on a phone call or a FaceTime call with somebody now using Spatial Personas. And I did a group call with this with 3 people. And it just seemed crazy. Like it makes me not even want to go outside anymore because I have my friends in the room with me. And you could also take this a step further and use SharePlay with your Spatial Personas and do things like play board games. And it's as if they were actually in the room playing that board game with you. It's quite crazy and quite dystopian. Also, something interesting that happened this week is one of Apple's lead designers for Safari left Apple to join the browser company who own Arc, which is my favorite iOS browser aside from Safari. I actually started using Arc a few months back. I posted about this in the Apple Den newsletter, and I've really not used Safari very much at all in the past, like maybe 3 or 4 months. But this company, the browser company, raised $50 million at a $550 million valuation recently. So they definitely have the money to pay some ex-Apple employees. But what's interesting is that this was not an ex-Apple employee. This man was currently working at Apple as one of the lead designers for Safari. So it's pretty interesting. I mean, Art could be onto something here. Also, just today, Apple released 3 new Apple Arcade games. So we have this Puzzle Pop, we have Sago Mini Trips, and Super Monsters Ate My Condo. So I will leave links to all 3 of these new Apple Arcade games down in the description below if you are a subscriber. All right, so now let's move on to iOS 17.5. So just this week, Apple finally ended the software drought. It had been 5 weeks since a beta update before this week. So Apple ended the drought with the release of 17.5 Beta 1, and it's a relatively minor update, but there are a few more changes that were included in the software that I did not mention in my original What's New video. So we're going to take a look at those. And the first one actually comes in the Books application. So if we go into Books right here, you will see that up in the top right, we have a new UI, a new interface here for the reading goals. So it's up at the top here instead of being underneath of home. And I just like how it has a very simple interface now. It no longer has today's reading and 5 minutes left. It just simplifies that whole interface. Also, iOS 17.5 is finally going to implement the Google and Apple partnership that we heard about a few months ago, where the Found Moving With You alerts are going to come to third-party item trackers. So according to 9to5Mac, in the code of iOS 17.5, there are strings added to the Find My application that show that iOS is going to identify tracking accessories even if they're not Apple or Find My certified. And this is going to help users disable those tracking devices if they are following them. Also in the code, we can see that MDM solutions can now enforce a beta version during automated device enrollment. And then in the code of iPadOS 17.5, we see references to a new squeeze gesture that's expected to come in the upcoming Apple Pencil 3. And this gesture can apparently be used for quick interactions such as adding shapes, signatures, stickers, or a text field. And also in the code of iPadOS 17.5, it looks like the upcoming iPads are going to get the battery capacity and cycle count menu that we see on the iPhone 15 series. So right here where we can see the battery capacity and the cycle count, that's apparently going to be coming to the new iPad Pro, and I would suppose the iPad Air as well. And then if you watch my iOS 17.5 Beta 1 What's New video, you would know that the release notes were not released at the time of recording that video, but they did come out later, and it's a big nothing burger. There's really nothing included in here. So we have the accessibility known issue, we have a couple of new features to Core Motion, and then a resolved issue for StoreKit. So really nothing going on with the release notes for 17.5. I'm not sure why they couldn't push this out right once the software was released. Also this week, we saw a new update to the iWork suite of applications. So Pages, Numbers, and Keynote all got updated to version 14.0, and you can see the changes here for all 3 of those. And then also if you have the AirPods Max, those just received a new firmware update this week. So the new build number is 6A325. We don't know what has been changed because Apple did not say anything. But if you notice anything new with your AirPods Max or any improvements, let me know in a comment below. Now, as far as the performance and battery life goes, performance on 17.5 Beta 1 is perfect. I mean, there's really no complaints with performance for me. Now, there are some UI bugs. Like if you go into the battery section and settings here under charging title, you can see that this is all bugged out with the placeholder text still there, but it's really just UI bugs. I've not faced any type of bug so far on 17.5 Beta 1, and performance overall is great. Like I did run a Geekbench test and I did score a 2893 and a 7124, which was lower than 17.4.1, but it doesn't really make a difference in my day-to-day usage on my main device or on this test device. And then same goes with battery life. So I'm going to pull up my main device here on 17.5 Beta 1. So I'm running the public beta on my main device. So I did get the update a couple of days later, but you can see how the battery is performing there on 17.5 Beta 1. I've really not heard anybody complain about battery life either in 17.5 Beta 1 just yet. But keep in mind, we are probably going to be on this first beta for at least another week or so. And with that being said, let's talk about that. So let's go into the calendar and take a look at what to expect next from Apple. So I'm expecting Apple to take a break from software releases next week. We might see something minor next week, but I would not expect to see iOS 17.5 Beta 2 until the week of April 15th. It's most likely going to be on Tuesday, April 16th, when we see iOS and iPadOS 17.5 Beta 2. Now, as far as the final release for 17.5, I would not expect that until May. Now, we are hearing that new iPads are coming out in May. However, Mark Gurman did say that Apple's working on a specific version of iOS 17.4, iPadOS 17.4 for those new iPads. So that tells me that the release date for 17.5 is not necessarily going to be on the same timeline as the new iPads. So I would actually expect to see the new iPads first before getting the 17.5 update. So that tells me we're probably not going to see 17.5 until the second half of May. Now, of course, that could change, and that's why you're subscribed to my channel. In case things do change, you will be notified right away, but that's what it's looking like right now for 17.5. Now, I would not expect to see a 17.4.2. It is possible, but it's typically pretty rare for Apple to have a 0.2 update. But again, we do have a big gap between the next software update, so if Apple does find anything, any type of security vulnerability or any type of major bug, they will push out a 17.4.2. But as of the time of recording, we've not seen anything to indicate that that is coming, at least not yet. So that is an update on iOS 18, iOS 17.5 Beta 1, and all of the other software related updates that came throughout this week. And by the way, if you are a regular viewer of the channel, you would recognize that this video is a little bit different from my Apple Weekly series, because usually with the Apple Weekly series, I just combine everything that happened in the week into one big video, but I decided to split it up again. I did this last year a little bit, but I'm going to try it again here. So I'm going to split the iOS and software specific news and the hardware related news into two separate videos. That way it's just not too much information overload and giving you information that you don't necessarily care about. And what I mean by that is if you're clicking on a video about iOS 18 and iOS 17.5, you're not going to get an update on, the new AirPods coming out and the new iPhone coming out. That's going to be in a separate video that is titled accordingly. So hope that makes sense, and let me know if you dislike that idea, if you are for that idea. I am always open to your suggestions and what you guys like best, because that is how I run this channel, is based on what you guys like the best. So let me know, and if you enjoyed this video, I would appreciate if you gave it a thumbs up. Also, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on future iOS and Apple Weekly episodes. But anyways, guys, thanks again for watching, and I'll see you soon.